Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku inherited the mantle of Shazam's champion. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The wind on the rooftop was a lonely sound. It whipped around Izuku Midoriya's small frame, tugging at his green-black hair and rustling the pages of his charred notebook. Hero analysis for the future, no. 13. The edges were blackened, the spine warped from its dunking in the koi pond, and now, it felt as heavy as a tombstone in his hands. Each gust of wind seemed to whisper the words he'd heard only moments ago, the words that had finally, definitively, killed the last flickering ember of his dream. It's not bad to dream, young man. But you need to be realistic. The voice had belonged to All Might. His hero. His god. The man whose smile was supposed to save everyone. But it hadn't saved him. It had been a gentle, sad smile, the kind a doctor gives when delivering a terminal diagnosis. The diagnosis was quirkless. Terminal. No chance of becoming a hero. Izuku's shoulders slumped, the weight of a million shattered childhood fantasies pressing down on him. He had chased All Might, clung to his leg in a desperate, foolish act, and had the truth laid bare. The skeletal, steaming man was the reality behind the myth. And that reality had confirmed what everyone else, from his doctors to his classmates to Kaken, had told him his entire life. You can't. He squeezed his eyes shut, tears tracing hot paths through the grime on his cheeks. He'd cried so much today, cried from fear in the underpass, cried from relief when All Might saved him, and now, he cried from a despair so profound it felt like a physical chasm had opened in his chest. He shuffled to the edge of the roof, the safety railing a cool, solid line against his trembling hands. The city of Muzurifu sprawled below, a vibrant tapestry of life and sound. Cars hummed along streets, people bustled on sidewalks, and in the distance, the faint wail of a siren signaled that somewhere, a hero was doing what he never could. He was an outsider looking in, forever separated from the world he worshipped by a simple, cruel twist of genetics. Taking a shuddering breath, he turned away from the edge. The thought that had flickered in the back of his mind, a dark, tempting whisper, was horrifying. He wasn't that person. Even if he couldn't be a hero, he couldn't end it like that. It would break his mom's heart. With leaden feet, he descended the stairs, the metallic echo of his footsteps the only sound in the quiet stairwell. He emerged back into the late afternoon sun, the world seeming muted and gray. He walked on autopilot, his gaze fixed on the cracked pavement, the charred notebook held loosely at his side. He didn't know where he was going, only that it was away from that rooftop and the ghost of his dream. Then he heard it. A familiar sound. An explosion. His head snapped up. Instinct, honed by years of obsessive hero chasing, took over. Smoke was pluming from a narrow shopping district a few blocks away. A crowd was gathering, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. Izuku's feet, moving with a will of their own, began to carry him forward, first at a walk then a jog. What are you doing? A voice in his head screamed. It doesn't matter anymore. You're just a spectator. You've always been just a spectator. But he couldn't stop. He pushed through the throng of people, his small stature an advantage for once, and broke through to the police line. His heart plummeted into his stomach. It was him. The sludge villain from the underpass. The amorphous, putrid green body writhed and thrashed, filling the narrow street. But it wasn't empty this time. It had a hostage. A boy with spiky, ash-blonde hair was trapped within the suffocating sludge, his hands sparking with small, desperate explosions. Kaken. Izuku's blood ran cold. Bakugo was fighting, trying to blast his way free, but his explosions were only agitating the villain, setting fire to the surrounding storefronts. The heroes on the scene were stalled. Kamui Woods couldn't get close because of the fire. Empty Lady was too big for the narrow alley. Backdraft was busy containing the blaze. Death Arms was strong, but his punches had no effect on the villain's liquid form. They were all there, all powerful, and all utterly, hopelessly ineffective. He heard the whispers in the crowd. Isn't that the villain All Might was chasing earlier? He must have gotten away from him. Why aren't the heroes doing anything? Izuku saw the look in Bakugo's eyes. He knew that look. Beneath the rage, the pride, the fury, was terror. Pure, undiluted terror. His childhood friend, his tormentor, the boy he had always admired for his strength and confidence, was suffocating. He was asking for help. In that moment, everything else fell away. The rooftop. All Might's words. The notebook. The soul-crushing reality of being quirkless. None of it mattered. A hero wasn't someone who waited for permission. A hero was someone who moved. His school bag slid from his shoulder, hitting the pavement with a soft thud. His legs, those traitorous, instinct-driven limbs, were already pumping, carrying him under the police tape and into the danger zone. "No, you idiot! Stop!" Death Arms yelled, but Izuku didn't hear him. The world had narrowed to a single, desperate objective. He remembered a page in his notebook. Sludge villain, weaknesses, eyes, solid body within. He had no plan, just a frantic, burning need to do something. He unslung his backpack and hurled it with all his might. It sailed through the air, the corner of a heavy textbook striking the villain directly in its massive, vulnerable eye. The villain roared, its grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was enough. Bakugo could gasp for a precious lungful of air. "Deku? What the hell are you doing here?" He choked out. "I don't know." Izuku screamed back, clawing uselessly at the sludge imprisoning Bakugo's body. "My legs they just started moving. I couldn't just stand there and watch you die, Kaken." The villain's eye refocused, its rage now directed at the insignificant gnat trying to steal its prize. A massive tendril of sludge coalesced, surging toward Izuku like a tidal wave of filth. This was it. He was going to die. A pathetic, quirkless nobody who ran into a fight he couldn't win. But as he looked at Bakugo's wide, terrified eyes, he felt a strange sense of peace. He had tried. He squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the impact. And then, nothing. The roar of the fire, the screams of the crowd, the gurgling of the villain, it all just stopped. An absolute, profound silence descended, so complete it felt like the universe was holding its breath. The pressure of the air changed, growing heavy and thick with the scent of ozone, like the air after a lightning strike. Izuku tentatively opened his eyes. The world was frozen. A piece of flying debris hung suspended in the air. The flames from the storefronts were motionless, like a photograph of a fire. The sludge villain's attack was a statue of malice, inches from his face. Everything was cast in a strange, gray-blue light. A low, rumbling crackle filled the silence. It wasn't thunder, it was older, deeper. A fissure of pure white energy, brighter than the sun, tore through the fabric of reality before him. It wasn't a door. It was a wound in the world. And from that wound, an invisible force pulled him, yanking him from his frozen tableau of death. He tumbled through a vortex of raw energy, colors and sounds he couldn't comprehend assaulting his senses. It was over in an instant. His feet hit solid stone, and he stumbled forward, catching himself on his hands and knees. He pushed himself up, his body trembling, and took in his surroundings. He was in a cavern. No, a hall. It was immense, so vast the ceiling was lost in shadow. The air was cold, still, and smelled of ancient stone and dust. 7 towering, monstrous statues lined the hall, carved in poses of agony and sin. They seemed to watch him with empty eyes, radiating an aura of pure malevolence that made the hair on his arms stand up. At the far end of the hall, perched atop a short flight of steps, was a massive throne carved from the same dark, living rock. And on that throne sat a man. He was ancient, impossibly so. A white beard, long and thin, cascaded down his chest. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, and his eyes, though clouded with age, held a piercing intelligence that seemed to see right through Izuku, stripping away his fear and insecurities, looking directly at his soul. He wore simple, dark robes and held a long, gnarled wooden staff. Izuku felt an overwhelming sense of insignificance, a small boy standing in a place of immense, forgotten power. "Izuku Midoriya," the old man's voice echoed in the hall. It was frail, yet it carried an authority that resonated in Izuku's very bones. Who are you? Where am I?" Izuku stammered, his voice small and thin. "Is this a quirk?" "The villain. Kaken, he is safe for the moment. Time is pliable here, the old man said, a faint, weary smile touching his lips. You are in the rock of eternity, the nexus of all magic. And I am its last guardian. You may call me Shazam. Izuku's mind, the mind of an analyst, tried to process the information. Magic? Rock of Eternity? It sounded like something from a pre-Quirk fantasy novel. It didn't make any sense. I have watched humanity for millennia, the wizard continued, his gaze unwavering. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have seen the very laws of your world change with the dawn of what you call quirks. For centuries, I have sought a champion, someone to inherit my power and carry the mantle of protector. He leaned forward, his ancient eyes boring into Izuku's. I have found many with great strength, with dazzling abilities, with clever minds. But all of them, in the end, were tainted. By greed. By pride. By envy. He gestured with a frail hand toward the monstrous statues. The sins that my power keeps chained. Izuku stared at the statues, a cold dread washing over him as he understood. Pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, wrath, and sloth. The 7 deadly sins. They weren't just statues. They were prisoners. The rise of quirks made my search more difficult, the wizard sighed. Power became commonplace, a matter of genetic lottery. The concept of earning it, of being worthy of it, faded. But the one quality I seek, the single most important trait for a champion, has remained. It is a quality that cannot be granted by a quirk. A pure heart. A truly selfless soul. The wizard's eyes softened. I have watched you, Izuku Midoriya. I have seen the others mock you for your dream. I saw your heart break on that rooftop today, and just now, I saw you, with no power, no hope of victory, run towards certain death to save the very boy who has tormented you your entire life. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the vast hall. You did not run in because you thought you could win. You ran in because you could not do otherwise. That is the heart of a true hero. I do not see quirkless, Izuku Midoriya. I see a heart worthy of thunder. Izuku's breath hitched. Tears welled in his eyes again, but these were different. They weren't tears of despair. All his life, he had been defined by what he lacked. This ancient, impossible being was the first person since his own mother to define him by what he had. I don't understand, Izuku whispered. What do you want from me? My time is at an end, the wizard said, his voice growing fainter. My strength fails. I can no longer contain the sins alone. I offer you my power, Izuku. A power not of the body, but of the gods themselves. A power forged in magic, the source from which quirks are but a pale, chaotic echo. The wizard raised his staff, and 6 ethereal symbols blazed to life in the air between them. I will grant you the combined might of 6 legendary patrons, he declared, his voice regaining its booming authority. As for the wisdom of Solomon, he intoned, and Izuku felt a sudden, dizzying flash of clarity, as if the universe's greatest library had been opened to him for a split second. You will have tactical genius, perfect memory, and the ability to understand any language. H for the strength of Hercules, the wizard continued, and Izuku felt a phantom surge of power in his limbs, the potential to move mountains. You will possess strength beyond that of any mortal. For the stamina of Atlas, he said, and Izuku imagined a world on his shoulders, a weight he could bear without tiring. You will never need to eat, sleep, or breathe, and you can withstand any attack. Z for the power of Zeus, the wizard's voice crackled with energy, and the air in the hall hummed. You will command the divine lightning, the source of the magic itself. It will fuel your transformation and serve as your greatest weapon. For the courage of Achilles, he spoke, and Izuku felt his own fear recede, replaced by an unshakable sense of resolve. You will be filled with an inner strength and invulnerability that makes you nearly impervious to harm. And M for the speed of Mercury, the wizard finished, the final symbol glowing brightly. You will move with supernatural speed and be granted the power of flight. Together, the wizard said, the 6 symbols coalescing into a single, stylized lightning bolt, they form my name. An acronym of power. Shazam. He looked at Izuku, the offer hanging in the ancient air. All you must do is accept this sacred duty. Take my power. And speak my name. Izuku stood, paralyzed. It was too much. Gods. Magic. A power that dwarfed anything he had ever read about in his notebooks. It was the dream he'd been denied, handed to him on a scale he could never have imagined. But the wizard's words echoed in his mind. Duty. Champion. This wasn't just a gift, it was a burden, a responsibility to protect the world not just from villains, but from those things. The sins. He thought of the sludge villain. Of Bakugo, choking, his life slipping away. He thought of All Might, his power fading, his time running out. The world needed heroes, and here, in this impossible place, he was being offered the chance to be one. The greatest one. He looked at the frail wizard, saw the desperation in his ancient eyes, and made his choice. He wiped the tears from his face, straightened his back, and for the first time since he'd been 4 years old, he let himself believe. I accept. The wizard's weary face broke into a radiant smile. A wave of relief so powerful it was palpable washed over him. Then speak my name, my boy. Speak it, and become my champion. Izuku took a deep breath. He focused on the raw energy in the room, on the promise of power, on the image of Bakugo's terrified face. He needed to get back. He needed to save him. He opened his mouth and, with all the conviction in his soul, he shouted the word that would change his life, and the world forever. Shazam! The wizard's staff erupted with light. A bolt of pure, living lightning, more brilliant and powerful than anything Zeus could conjure, shot from the staff and struck Izuku square in the chest. There was no pain. Only power. It felt like a star being born inside him. He felt his bones lengthen, his muscles swell and harden with the strength of Hercules. He grew taller, his scrawny, teenage frame reshaping itself into the idealized physique of an adult hero in his prime. The wisdom of Solomon flooded his mind, a torrent of knowledge, tactics, and ancient history that he absorbed in a nanosecond, not as memorized facts, but as innate understanding. He felt the unending endurance of Atlas anchor his soul, the unshakable courage of Achilles forge his spirit into tempered steel, and the fleet-footed energy of Mercury hum in his veins. His tattered school uniform disintegrated in the magical fire, replaced by a new suit that formed around him. It was a deep, forest green, the color of his hair and his mother's eyes. A single, stylized lightning bolt, glowing with a soft, internal viridian light, emblazoned his chest. A pristine white cape, edged with intricate gold patterns, settled over his shoulders, fastened by golden clasps. Gold gauntlets covered his forearms and gold boots encased his feet. He felt a hood, part of the cape, settle over his head, casting his newly chiseled features in shadow. The transformation was complete. He looked down at his hands, no longer small and scarred, but large, powerful, and crackling with faint green sparks of divine energy. He was no longer Izuku Midoriya, the scared, quirkless boy. He was a champion. A hero. And with that final thought, the rock of eternity vanished. The world snapped back into place. He was back in the alley. Time, for everyone else, had not moved a single instant. The sludge villain's attack, which was about to kill a teenage boy, now slammed into the chest of a god. It was like a water balloon hitting a brick wall. The sludge splashed harmlessly against him. The villain reeled back in shock, its single eye wide with confusion. The crowd gasped. The pro-heroes stared, their jaws agati. Who are you? Kamui shouted. Bakugo, still trapped but with his head now free, stared at the newcomer, his red eyes wide with a mixture of terror and utter disbelief. This man, he had appeared from nowhere, from the exact spot that useless Deku had been standing. The champion, Izuku, didn't answer. The wisdom of Solomon had already processed the entire situation, analyzed every variable, and provided a dozen perfect solutions. He chose the simplest. He moved with the speed of Mercury, a green and white blur that no one could track. One moment he was standing in front of the villain, the next he was behind it, his hands firmly gripping Bakugo's arms. With a single, effortless pull, he ripped Bakugo free from the sludge, the villain's gelatinous body offering no more resistance than water. He set Bakugo down behind the police line, a safe distance away. Stay here, the champion's voice boomed. It was Izuku's voice, yet deeper, imbued with an ancient authority that commanded obedience. Before anyone could react, he was back in front of the villain. The sludge monster roared in fury and lunged, trying to engulf him. The champion simply held up a hand. He didn't even brace himself. He took the full impact of the villain's attack without moving a single inch, the stamina of Atlas making him an immovable object. "You have caused enough fear today," he said, his voice calm and steady. He drew back his right fist, which began to crackle with the power of Zeus. The green lightning bolt on his chest flared with blinding intensity. He wasn't just throwing a punch, he was focusing the concussive force of a thunderstorm into a single point. He punched the air an inch in front of the sludge villain's main body. The sound was deafening. A thunderclap that shattered every window in the block. A shockwave of pure force erupted from his fist, a controlled, directed blast of wind and power. The sludge villain didn't even have time to scream. Its body was instantly atomized, dispersed into a fine, harmless mist that was carried away on the wind the punch had created. The fires on the nearby buildings were simultaneously snuffed out by the sudden rush of air. Silence. The entire street was silent. The crowd stared, dumbfounded. The heroes looked on, their powers feeling like children's party tricks in the face of what they had just witnessed. Bakugo was on his knees, staring at the spot where his captor, and Deku, had been, his mind completely unable to process the sequence of events. The champion stood alone in the center of the street, his white cape billowing gently in the breeze his own attack had created. He was an icon of impossible power. He took one look at the stunned faces, at the arriving reporters, at the dawning realization in Bakugo's eyes. He couldn't stay. He didn't have an identity, a license. The wisdom of Solomon told him to disappear. He pushed off the ground, and with the speed of Mercury, shot into the sky, breaking the sound barrier in an instant. A green and gold comet streaking away into the clouds. But he didn't go far. A few blocks away, in the quiet shadows of an abandoned alley, he landed softly. The power was overwhelming, a roaring ocean inside him. He needed to be Izuku again. He focused, remembered the wizard's words. He whispered the name. Shazam. The lightning, green and divine, struck him again, but this time it felt like it was drawing the power out. He shrank, the muscles receding, the costume dissolving back into his soot-covered, sludge-stained school uniform. He stumbled, falling to his knees, his body trembling from the sheer sensory whiplash. He was just a boy again. Scrawny, weak, and utterly exhausted. Just as his vision began to fade, a massive shadow fell over him. "I am here!" A familiar, booming voice declared. Izuku looked up to see All Might, in all his smiling, muscular glory, landing at the end of the alley. But the smile wasn't there. The hero's face was a mask of confusion, shock, and deep, profound concern. He had been too late to the fight, but he had seen the aftermath. He had seen the green comet fly away, and now, he stood before the very boy he had left on a rooftop, the boy he had told had no hope, who was now kneeling in an alley, smelling of ozone and impossible power. The alley was a pocket of grimy silence in a city still buzzing with sirens. For Izuku Midoriya, it was a crucible. One moment, he had been a vessel of cosmic power, a being of thunder and might. The next, he was just himself again, a scrawny 15-year-old boy on his hands and knees, every muscle screaming in protest, his head pounding from the psychic whiplash of transitioning from god to mortal. The scent of ozone was so thick it was almost a taste, a metallic tang on his tongue that was the only physical proof of the miracle that had just occurred. A colossal shadow fell over him, and a voice that could command armies and comfort children boomed through the narrow space. "I am here!" Izuku's head, heavy as lead, craned upwards. It was All Might, his golden hair like a solar flare against the darkening sky. But the trademark, V-shaped smile was gone. In its place was an expression of utter, unadulterated shock. His blue eyes, usually so full of vibrant hope, were wide with 1,000 questions as they scanned the alley, from the scorch marks on the brickwork to the trembling boy kneeling at his feet. "Young man," All Might began, his voice losing its customary boom, shrinking to a more human volume. "Midoriya. What was that? Are you all right?" Izuku tried to speak, but only a dry rasp escaped his throat. He was empty. The boundless energy of Atlas, the divine wellspring that negated all physical need, was gone. Now, He was just a boy who had sprinted into a villain fight, clawed at sludge, and been struck by magic lightning twice. He was beyond exhausted. I don't. He stammered, his mind a frantic scramble. How could he explain? A wizard? The Rock of Eternity? The 7 deadly sins? He sounded insane even to himself. All Might took a step closer, his massive form seeming to shrink as his concern grew. He knelt, an act that seemed as strange as a mountain bowing, bringing himself closer to Izuku's level. I saw you run in. It was reckless, foolish, and the bravest thing I have ever seen. His eyes flickered with a deep, conflicted emotion. And then, you were gone. And that other hero, he appeared right where you were standing. He defeated the villain in a single blow, and then vanished into the sky. He paused, his gaze intensifying. I followed the trail of energy. It led me here. To you? Lying where he would have landed. Tell me what happened. The sincerity in All Might's voice was a hook in Izuku's soul. He couldn't lie to his idol. Not about this. But the truth was impossible. It was me, Izuku whispered, the confession feeling like a betrayal of a sacred secret. That hero, it was me. All Might was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. He had seen thousands of quirks. Transformation quirks that altered the body. Emitter quirks that produced energy. Mutant quirks that were a permanent state. What Izuku was describing didn't fit neatly into any category. The sheer scale of the power, the instant appearance and disappearance. It was an anomaly. A quirk, All Might stated, more a question than a declaration. A late-blooming transformation quirk? One activated by extreme stress? It was the only logical explanation within their world's framework. Izuku seized the lifeline. It wasn't the truth, but it was close enough to grasp. I think so. It's never happened before. Show me, All Might said, his voice gentle but firm. If you can. I need to understand. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. Could he do it again? The first time had been an act of desperation. The second, a release. This would be a conscious choice. He took a shaky breath, the memory of the wizard's face and the feel of the power still fresh in his mind. He looked at All Might's earnest, pleading face. He had to. He closed his eyes, focusing on the intent. Not just the word, but the duty behind it. The need to be a protector. He planted his feet as firmly as he could on the cracked asphalt, drew in a lungful of air, and spoke the name that was now etched into his soul. Shazam! For All Might, the experience was breathtaking. 1 second, the trembling, soot-stained boy was standing before him. The next, the very air in the alley warped. A bolt of lightning, crackling with an energy that felt ancient and raw, far different from the electric quirks he'd encountered, lanced down from a cloudless sky and struck the boy. There was no thunderous boom, only a sharp, resonant crack that seemed to shake the world on its axis. The light was blinding. When it faded a microsecond later, Izuku Midoriya was gone. In his place stood the champion. He was a head taller than All Might's civilian form, his physique that of a perfectly sculpted athlete. The deep green suit seemed to absorb the shadows, while the stylized lightning bolt on his chest pulsed with a soft, internal luminescence. A pristine white and gold cape hung from his shoulders, untouched by the alley's filth. The being radiated an aura of calm, absolute power that All Might, the world's strongest man, found himself instinctively respecting. It wasn't a power built on anger or effort. It was a power that simply was. The champion raised his head, and All Might saw his eyes beneath the hood. They were Izuku's eyes, the same vibrant green, but they held the profound, unnerving depth of the wisdom of Solomon. They were the eyes of an old soul looking out from a young man's face. This is the power I was given, the champion said. His voice was a resonant baritone, worlds away from Izuku's nervous tenor. It carried an echo of ancient halls and cosmic truths. It is a gift. A duty. All Might was speechless. He could feel the power rolling off the man in waves. It was comparable to his own, perhaps even greater in its raw, untamed potential. It felt less like a quirk and more like a fundamental force of nature had been given a human form. He had been ready to mentor a boy. He was now face to face with a demigod. Incredible. All Might breathed, his mind struggling to categorize what he was seeing. The champion gave a solemn nod. Then, with a quiet whisper that All Might's enhanced hearing barely caught, he spoke the name again. Shazam. Another flash of lightning, this one seeming to leap from the man and into the sky, and he was gone. Izuku Midoriya was back, collapsing to one knee, panting heavily as if he'd just run a marathon. The sudden return to his frail human body was a violent shock to his system. All Might rushed forward, steadying the boy with a hand on his shoulder. He could feel the frailness of him, the bird-like bones and the racing pulse. The contrast was staggering, almost impossible to reconcile. "I believe you, my boy," All Might said, his voice thick with awe. He helped Izuku to his feet, guiding him to sit on a discarded crate. For several minutes neither spoke. All Might was processing an event that fundamentally challenged his understanding of the world. Izuku was just trying to breathe. Finally, All Might spoke, his tone shifting. It was the tone he used when he was being Tashinori Yagi, the man, not All Might the symbol. "That power, it is magnificent," he said, his gaze distant. "A power to save countless people. A power to change the world." He then turned his full attention to Izuku, his eyes locking onto the boy's. "But it is not why I came back for you. It is not why I am still here." Izuku looked up, confused. What do you mean?" "I asked the other heroes at the scene what happened," All Might explained, his voice low and earnest. "They told me that while they were all standing there, hesitating, calculating the risks, a quirkless boy with a backpack and nothing to gain ran headfirst into danger. You, young Midoriya, you ran in to save your friend before you had this power. You moved before anyone else." He leaned in, his skeletal face etched with a profound sincerity Izuku had only ever seen in his hero's most desperate moments on TV. There are stories about every hero, how they got their powers, their first costume, their first victory. But the real story, the one that matters, is the moment they chose to be a hero. Your moment was not when the lightning struck you, it was when you threw your backpack. Izuku felt tears welling up again, his emotional defenses completely shattered by the day's events. "That," All Might said, his voice trembling with conviction, "is the spirit I have been searching for. It is the quality that power cannot grant, and that no villain can take away. It is for that reason, for the hero you were before you had any power at all, that I have something to offer you." All Might stood up, and with a grunt of effort, his body began to swell. Steam poured from his skin as muscles ballooned, his emaciated form replaced by the colossal, iconic physique of the symbol of peace. "I have a secret of my own, young man," he boomed, striking a pose. "My quirk is not one I was born with. It was passed down to me." Izuku could only stare, his jaw hanging open as the final, impossible puzzle piece of his life slotted into place. "It is a sacred torch," All Might declared, his voice resonating with the weight of history. "A power passed from generation to generation, growing stronger with each user. It is the crystallization of human will, a quirk that stockpiles power to be wielded against evil. Its name—" He placed a hand on his own chest, a gesture of immense pride and responsibility. "Is one for all." He explained everything. The long line of users. The sacred duty to cultivate the power and pass it on. And the ultimate evil it was created to fight, a shadowy mastermind named All for One, a villain who could steal and grant quirks, the man who had given him his grievous injury. "The power you have," All Might said, gesturing to Izuku, "is like a bolt of lightning from the heavens. It is immense, divine, perhaps even eternal. But one for all, this is a human power. It is the culmination of human will, the combined strength and sacrifice of everyone who has ever held it. It is a small candle flame we have kept alive in the encroaching darkness for over a century." He looked down at Izuku, his expression more serious than the boy had ever seen. "I was searching for a successor. My time in this form is dwindling. I believe you are worthy. I believe you have the heart to carry this torch." He held out his hand. "Even with the incredible power you now possess, I ask you, young Midoriya, will you accept my power? Will you inherit One for All and carry on our legacy?" Izuku's mind was a maelstrom. It was too much. The power of the gods, and now the power of the greatest hero. It felt Greedy. He already had so much. Why would he need more? But then, the wisdom of Solomon, which had been a quiet, background hum of understanding, flared to life. It wasn't a voice. It was a sudden, profound comprehension. As All Might spoke of the torch, Izuku didn't just hear the words, he understood the scale of it. He saw, in his mind's eye, a chain of brave souls stretching back through time, each one fighting, bleeding, and dying to keep that small flame alive. He felt the weight of their sacrifice, the crushing burden of their hope. He understood that One for All wasn't just another power. It was a promise. A legacy. A testament to humanity's refusal to surrender to darkness. The Shazam power made him a champion, a guardian against mystical threats. It was the power of a protector, a shield. But One for All, that was the power of a successor. It was a sword forged and tempered by human hands, meant to fight a uniquely human evil. They weren't redundant. They were two halves of a whole. One was a duty given to him by a wizard, the other was a trust being placed in him by a hero. To refuse would be to let that chain break. To let that flame die. He couldn't do it. Tears streamed freely down his face, carving clean paths through the grime. He looked up at his idol, his hero, the man who had crushed his dream and then offered him two new ones in its place. He nodded, his whole body trembling with the enormity of the moment. Yes, he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. Yes, All Might. I'll do it. All Might's booming laugh was a sound of pure relief and joy. He plucked a single strand of his golden hair. Excellent. Now, eat this. The next 10 months were a study in duality. Izuku Midoriya lived two lives, each a secret from the other, both secrets from the world. His days began before sunrise at Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. It had become an illegal dumping ground, a mountain range of forgotten appliances and rusted metal husks. This was the crucible All Might had chosen for him. To inherit One for All, his body had to be a worthy vessel, strong enough to contain a hurricane of power without tearing itself apart. This is your origin story, my boy. All Might would bellow from atop a mountain of trash, holding a stopwatch. Every hero has to start somewhere. Your journey starts by moving a refrigerator. Izuku could have transformed. The champion could have cleared the entire beach in under an hour, the strength of Hercules making the tons of garbage feel like styrofoam. The thought was a constant, tantalizing temptation. Every time his muscles screamed, every time he collapsed into the sand, gasping for air, a voice whispered in the back of his mind. Just say the word, but he refused. Every single time. This, he decided, was for Izuku Midoriya. One for All was a gift he had to earn. He had to prove to All Might, and more importantly, to himself, that the boy who ran into the alley was still there. He would build his body with his own two hands, through sweat and pain and sheer, bloody-minded determination. The Shazam power was a responsibility. One for All had to be a reward, so he pushed. He pulled. He hauled broken washing machines and tangled masses of steel rebar, his muscles tearing and rebuilding themselves stronger than before. He followed All Might's American dream plan to the letter, slowly, painstakingly, transforming his scrawny frame into one of lean, wiry strength. The beach, bit by bit, began to reveal the sand and sea that had been buried for years. His nights, however, belonged to magic. After collapsing into bed, he wouldn't sleep. He would wait until his mother's gentle snores filled their small apartment, then slip out to secluded, empty places, abandoned warehouses, deep forests outside the city, the highest rooftops where no one ever went. There, under the moon, he would practice being a god, and he was terrible at it. His first attempt to test the strength of Hercules involved trying to gently lift a discarded engine block in a junkyard. He misjudged his own power by an astronomical margin and compressed a several hundred-pound piece of machinery into a fist-sized cube of twisted metal. The sound echoed for miles. He had to flee before anyone came to investigate. His control over the speed of Mercury was even worse. He wanted to learn to fly, to hover gently like All Might. He transformed, pushed off the ground, and intended to float a few feet in the air. Instead, he shot upwards like a cannonball, breaking the sound barrier in a deafening boom. He found himself thousands of feet in the air above the next prefecture, the wind screaming past him, with absolutely no idea how to steer or stop. He tumbled through the sky for what felt like an eternity before he managed to whisper the magic word, transforming back and plummeting until he was just a few hundred feet from the ground before transforming again to break his fall. He had to walk for 5 hours to get home, but the most disorienting power was the wisdom of Solomon. It wasn't a skill he could practice, it was a state of being. The moment he transformed, the world became a symphony of information. He could see the structural weaknesses in buildings, calculate the trajectory of falling leaves in a storm, understand the complex chemistry of the smog in the air. He overheard tourists speaking French and German and understood them as perfectly as his native Japanese. It was like his brain had been replaced with a supercomputer connected to an infinite library. It was incredible, but it was also terrifying. It felt like cheating. All his life, his one true talent had been his analytical mind, his obsessive note-taking, his ability to break down quirks and strategies. The wisdom of Solomon made all of that feel like a child's crayon drawings next to a masterpiece. It threatened to erase the very essence of who he was. Who was Deku if he didn't have to think, if the answers were simply there? This fear solidified his decision. He would compartmentalize. He would be two different people. First and foremost, he would be Izuku Midoriya, the successor to One for All. He would get into UA. With the power he had earned, the power he would learn to control through his own effort. He would rely on his own mind, his own strategies, his own courage. The champion would be his secret. A last resort? A nuclear option for a situation so catastrophic that Izuku Midoriya was not enough. The champion was a symbol, an ideal, a god. But Izuku had to be a hero. He was terrified of losing himself to the perfection of the champion, of becoming reliant on a power he hadn't truly earned. On the final day of the 10-month training period, the sun rose over a pristine, beautiful Dagoba beach. The last piece of trash, a rusted-out locker, was loaded onto the truck. Izuku, his body now a testament to his hard work, stood atop the clean-out garbage truck and screamed his victory to the rising sun. All Might, in his skeletal form, smiled, a tear of pride tracing a path down his cheek. He passed the glowing strand of hair to Izuku. As Izuku swallowed it, he felt a warmth spread through him, a new power settling deep in his bones, waiting to be called upon. One for All was now his. That morning, as he prepared for the UA entrance exam, he looked at his reflection in the mirror. He didn't see the scrawny, helpless boy from 10 months ago. He saw a young man with calloused hands, determined eyes, and a body ready for a challenge. He saw the boy who had cleaned an entire beach. He knew the champion was there, just a word away. A being of perfect strength, perfect speed, perfect courage. But that wasn't who was taking the exam today. Today, it would be Izuku Midoriya, armed with a legacy of human hope and a power he had yet to master. It would be harder. It would be more dangerous. And that was exactly how it had to be. The morning of the UA entrance exam dawned crisp and clear, painting the Muzurifu sky in hues of soft orange and violet. For Izuku Midoriya, it felt less like a sunrise and more like a starting gun. He stood before his full-length mirror, not in his school uniform, but in his tracksuit. 10 months of grueling, back-breaking labor had chiseled a new form from the scrawny boy he'd been. He wasn't muscular like All Might, but the wiry, defined strength was there, a testament to every refrigerator he'd hauled, every tire he dragged across the sand. It was a body he had built himself, and for the first time, he felt like it truly belonged to him. Beneath the surface, however, 2 universes of power lay dormant. One was a raging bonfire, a legacy of human hope named One for All. It hummed in his bones, a wild, untamed energy that felt like holding a live power cable. The other was a silent, deep ocean of cosmic might, the power of Shazam. It was a quiet hum in the back of his soul, a promise of divinity accessible with a single word. His strategy for the day was born from 100 sleepless nights spent analyzing this impossible duality. He couldn't walk into the UA exam, shout Shazam, and transform into a 7-foot-tall demigod. The questions would be endless. Where did this quirk come from? Why was it unregistered? How could a quirk completely rewrite his physical and biological data? It would draw the kind of attention that could expose not just him, but the wizard and the rock of eternity itself. The wisdom of Solomon, a silent partner in his thoughts, had confirmed the catastrophic risk. The world of quirks had its laws, its science. Magic was an anomaly that would be dissected, not celebrated. No, his path into UA had to be paved with one for all. It was a quirk, albeit a unique one. Its immense power, and the devastating recoil on his unprepared body would be the perfect cover. An uncontrollable strength enhancement quirk was something UA could understand. It was a challenge they had seen before. It was measurable. It was, in a word, believable. The champion would remain his secret, the ultimate ace in the hole, to be used only when all other options had failed. Izuku, sweetie? Are you ready? His mother's voice, laced with a familiar nervous tremor, drifted from the kitchen. Almost. He called back, taking one last deep breath. He looked at his reflection, at the determined green eyes staring back. This is for you, Izuku, he thought. The boy who cleaned a beach, the boy who earned his power. The UA campus was even more magnificent in person than on TV. The massive, H-shaped main building was a monument to heroism, its blue-tinted glass reflecting the sky like a promise. Hordes of nervous teenagers from dozens of different junior highs swarmed the entrance, a vibrant and intimidating sea of aspirations. Izuku felt a familiar pang of his old self-doubt, a shrinking feeling that had been his constant companion for a decade. He clutched the straps of his yellow backpack, his knuckles white. No, he told himself, straightening his back. You belong here. You earned this. The thought was bolstered by a whisper of Achilles' courage, a faint, residual warmth that helped him push through the crowd. The written portion of the exam was held in a colossal auditorium. As he sat down and the test paper was placed before him, he felt a wave of calm that surprised him. In the past, a test like this would have sent him into a spiral of anxiety. Now, as he read the questions, physics problems related to trajectory, ethics questions about collateral damage, history questions about the dawn of quirks, the answers didn't just come to him. He understood them on a fundamental level. It was the wisdom of Solomon, not feeding him answers like a cheat sheet, but granting him a profound clarity of thought. He saw the elegant simplicity in complex equations, the interconnected web of historical events, the subtle nuances of heroic law. He finished with time to spare, his confidence growing with each correctly filled circle. Next came the orientation for the practical exam. All the applicants were herded into another, even larger auditorium, this one with a stage and a gigantic screen. The lights dimmed, and a spotlight hit the stage, revealing a man with a wild mane of blonde hair, a leather jacket, and a directional speaker around his neck. Hello, examinees! The voice hero, Present Mike, screamed into his microphone, the sound wave rattling the seats. Welcome to the main event. Are you ready? The auditorium was mostly silent, a testament to the collective nervousness of hundreds of teenagers. Tough crowd. Present Mike yelled anyway. He launched into a high-speed explanation of the practical exam. The screen behind him lit up, showing a cityscape and silhouettes of 3 different types of robots. You'll be going head-to-head in a full-scale urban replica. You've got 10 minutes to rack up as many villain points as you can by taking down these faux villains. They come in 1, 2, and 3-point varieties. Think of it like a video game. Go for the high score. Izuku stared at the screen, his mind already racing. His notebook was in his bag, but he didn't need it. His analysis was now instantaneous. 1-pointers are likely fast but weak. 2-pointers are the standard ground troops, probably armored. 3-pointers are the big threats, maybe aerial or heavily armed. The key is efficiency. Don't waste time on a 3-pointer if you can take out 4 1-pointers in the same time frame. And one more thing. Present Mick's voice cut through his thoughts. There's a 4th type of robot. The 0-pointer. This guy's an arena trap. He's worth 0 points, so there's no reason to fight him. Your best bet, little listeners, is to run. On the screen, a massive shadow fell over the other robots. It was a gargantuan machine, easily the size of a skyscraper, its silhouette radiating pure menace. A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. A hand shot into the air. A tall, well-built young man with dark blue hair and glasses stood up, his posture ramrod straight. Excuse me, sir. I have a question, he announced, his voice sharp and commanding. Hit me, Examinee 7111. Present Mike shouted. On the printout you've provided, the boy said, holding up the exam leaflet, it clearly lists 4 types of villains. If this is a misprint, it is a gross error for Japan's top hero academy to make. He then swiveled, his arm chopping stiffly through the air to point directly at Izuku. And you, with the messy green hair. You have been muttering and distracting this entire time. If you are not taking this seriously, then you should leave, Izuku squeaked, his face flushing crimson as hundreds of eyes turned to him. Sorry, he mumbled, covering his mouth. The boy, who Izuku recognized as the one who nearly tripped him outside, huffed and sat down. The exam was about to begin. Izuku found himself in front of a massive gate marked Battle Center B. He was with a different group of students now, including the nice, brown-haired girl he'd spoken to briefly at the entrance. He bounced on the balls of his feet, trying to channel his nervous energy. He could feel one for all swirling within him, a tempest waiting for release. Okay, plan is simple. Find a robot, focus one for all into one limb, smash, and then deal with the consequences. He remembered All Might's words. Clench your butt cheeks and yell this from the bottom of your heart, smash! It sounded so simple. It felt so impossible. And start. President Mick's voice echoed from unseen speakers. The massive gates began to slide open. Izuku stood, frozen for a second, waiting for a signal. The other students didn't. They burst past him, a flood of quirks and determination. What are you waiting for? President Mick's voice blared again. There's no countdown in a real fight. Go, go, go! Izuku's eyes widened. He was already behind. He broke into a sprint, his newly powerful legs carrying him into the sprawling artificial city. The sounds of explosions, crashes, and shouting already filled the air. He rounded a corner and saw his first target, a sleek, one-point robot on treads, its single red eye scanning the area. This was it. His chance? Okay, deep breath. One for all. Full cowling. No, All Might said I can't do that yet. Just one arm. Clench, and smash. He drew his arm back, focusing all his will. He felt the power surge, a torrent of raw energy flooding his limb. Red-black sparks, like chaotic veins of lightning, crackled around his arm. It was too much. It was a dam about to burst. He could feel his own bones groaning under the strain before he'd even thrown the punch. It's like trying to make an egg explode in a microwave, All Might had warned. It'll burst you apart. He pulled back at the last second, stumbling forward as the power dissipated, leaving his arm tingling and numb. The robot's red eye swiveled to him. It raised a machine gun and opened fire. Izuku yelped and dove behind a car, the sound of bullets pinging off the metal rattling his nerves. This was harder than he thought. The power was too vast, too absolute. It was all or nothing, and all meant a shattered limb and a one-way trip to the infirmary. He'd be out of the fight after a single punch. He needed points. Plural. He peeked over the car. The robot was advancing. Panic began to set in. He had 2 of the most powerful abilities on the planet, and he was about to be taken out by a one-point grunt. The irony was suffocating. Think, Izuku, think! He berated himself. And then, a different kind of thought process took over, sharper and clearer than his own panic scramble. The wisdom of Solomon, unbidden, presented a solution. The quirk is unusable in its current state. The body is the limiting factor. Therefore, the body should not be the primary weapon. Utilize the environment. His eyes darted around. The street was littered with debris from other fights. A bent street sign. A chunk of shattered concrete. The car he was hiding behind. The robot's treads were its weak point, its joints unarmored. Its weapon had a limited traverse angle. He saw it all in a flash of tactical brilliance. He grabbed the piece of concrete, a jagged slab about the size of a dinner plate. As the robot rounded the car, he didn't try to smash it. He threw the concrete slab with all his natural, hard-earned strength. It wasn't a superpowered throw, but it was precise. The slab spun like a discus and slammed into the robot's knee joint, causing it to buckle. As the robot stumbled, Izuku lunged. He ripped the bent street sign from its post, the metal groaning in protest. He used it as a lever, jamming the sharp end into the robot's now exposed tread mechanism and prying with all his might. Metal shrieked and tore. The robot went down, immobilized. He brought the sign down like an axe on the robot's red eye, shattering the lens and causing it to spark and die. Target neutralized, the analytical part of his mind supplied. Points acquired 1. He stood panting, his heart hammering. It wasn't a smash. It wasn't a lightning bolt. It was just quick thinking and a piece of junk metal. But it worked. For the next 7 minutes, this became his pattern. He was a scavenger, a guerrilla fighter in a war of superpowers. While other examinees were leveling city blocks, he was a shadow in the streets. He saw Bakugo soaring through the air on explosions, shouting "Die!" as he obliterated a squad of 2-pointers. He saw the serious boy with glasses, Ida, moving in a blur, disabling robots with precise, piston-like kicks. He saw the girl with the bubbly personality, Uraraka, touching robots and sending them floating helplessly into the air before releasing them to crash back to Earth. Everyone was using their quirks. Everyone was racking up points. Izuku was using his wits. The wisdom of Solomon gave him an edge he couldn't have imagined. He could see the structural flaws in the robots, predicting where they would break. He caused 2-pointers to collide by throwing a hubcap to distract one. He lured a 3-pointer under a structurally weak overpass and then used a discarded pipe to break a key support, bringing a ton of concrete down on top of it. It was effective. It was clever. But it was slow. After nearly 8 minutes of non-stop, heart-pounding effort, his tally was a meager 13 points. It was respectable, but in an exam where some kids were likely hitting 50 or 60, it might not be enough. He was exhausted, bruised, and covered in grime. The promise of one for all felt like a cruel joke, a treasure chest for which he had no key. Suddenly, the ground began to tremble. A low, grinding rumble echoed through the city, growing louder with each passing second. A shadow fell over the street, vast and absolute. Izuku looked up, and his blood ran cold. The 0-pointer. It was bigger than he could have imagined. A mechanical titan of green and gray metal, it dwarfed the multi-story buildings it was now effortlessly pushing aside. Its single, glowing red eye was the size of a bus. It was less a robot and more a mobile skyscraper, a force of nature given mechanical form. 2 minutes left. President Mick's voice boomed, almost lost in the din. The reaction was instantaneous. Every other examinee, without exception, turned and fled. It's the 0-pointer. Run away! It's not worth any points. They were right. It was an obstacle, not an opponent. Izuku turned to run too, his survival instincts screaming at him. But then he heard a small cry of pain. He glanced back. About 50 yards away, near the base of the mechanical behemoth, lay the nice girl, Uraraka. Her leg was trapped under a huge slab of concrete, likely shaken loose by the robot's approach. She was struggling, her face pale with panic as the 0-pointer's massive foot began to rise, preparing to take another city-crushing step right where she was pinned. Time seemed to slow down. The other students were gone. The pro-heroes supervising the exam were watching, but they wouldn't intervene unless it was a true life-or-death situation. This was part of the test. A test of what, Izuku didn't know. But he saw her face, the terror in her eyes, and everything else ceased to matter. The points, the exam, his secret, it was all just noise. This was the moment. The sludge villain all over again. A person was in trouble. A hero had to act. His legs were already moving, carrying him not away from the danger, but directly towards it. What are my options? The question wasn't panic this time. It was sharp, analytical, fueled by a mixture of his own intelligence and Solomon's wisdom. Option 1, do nothing. Unacceptable. She would be crushed. Option 2, transform. He could say the word. In a flash, he would be the champion. He could stop the robot's foot with one hand, lift the slab of concrete with a finger, and fly her to safety. It would be effortless. But it would be a spectacle. The lightning bolt from a clear sky, the instantaneous transformation into an unknown hero. It would blow his cover completely. He'd pass the exam, but he'd spend the next year in a laboratory being studied. The risk was too high. It had to be the absolute last resort. Option 3, use one for all. This was the purpose of the exam. To use the quirk. But a 100% smash in his arm would only shatter his arm. Against a target this massive, it might not even be enough to divert its attention, let alone destroy it. What if he broke his arm and she still died? The thought was paralyzing. He was running out of time. The shadow of the robot's foot was beginning to descend. Uraraka's eyes were wide with a final, horrified acceptance. Izuku's mind raced, a frantic collision of logic and desperation. He felt the two powers within him, separate but coexisting. One for all, the crackling, chaotic storm of inherited human will, and the power of Zeus, the cool, focused, divine energy of pure magic. They were like oil and water, fire and ice. But what if for just a split second, he could force them to mix? What if he could use the controlled, precise nature of the divine lightning to channel the untamable flood of one for all? It was an insane gamble. He had no idea what would happen. It could amplify the power beyond his control. It could cause the two energies to cancel each other out. It could literally cause him to explode. He looked at Uraraka's face. He had no other choice. This is it. All or nothing. He planted his feet, bending his knees, channeling every ounce of his 10 months of training into his legs. He wasn't just going to punch. He was going to fly. One for all. He screamed, not just to the world, but to the power itself, a command and a plea. The fiery green-white energy erupted around him, far more potent than it had been when he tried to summon it in his arm. It coursed through his entire body, making every nerve ending feel like it was on fire. His skin glowed, and crackling lines of power traced paths across his limbs. Then, he reached deeper. He didn't say the word, but he called upon the intent. He focused on the Z in Shazam. He mentally called to the power of Zeus. For a breathtaking instant, he felt a second energy answer the call. It was not hot and chaotic like One for All. It was cool, ancient, and humming with absolute authority. Tendrils of brilliant, electric blue divine lightning surged from his core, wrapping around the chaotic green energy of One for All. The two powers intertwined, the blue lightning acting like a conduit, a magnetic bottle containing a fusion reaction. The very air around him warped, crackling with an energy that was neither fully quirk nor fully magic, but something terrifyingly new. With a roar that tore from his throat, he launched himself into the air. He didn't just jump, he detonated. The ground beneath him shattered into a crater as he shot upwards like a missile, a comet of green and blue energy. The world became a slow-motion blur. He saw the individual rivets on the zero-pointer's face. He saw the horrified, awestruck expressions of the other examinees who had stopped to watch. He saw the proctors in the observation room leap to their feet. He drew his right arm back. The swirling vortex of green and blue energy concentrated in his fist, so bright it was painful to look at. This wasn't just a smash. This was something more. He reached the apex of his jump, level with the robot's massive head. He put every ounce of his desperation, his will to protect, his inherited legacy, and his divine gift into one singular, cataclysmic strike. Eternal smash. The impact was silent for a fraction of a second as his fist met the robot's faceplate. And then, the universe seemed to explode. A wave of concussive force, visible as a ripple in the air, erupted outwards. The sound was not a punch. It was the simultaneous crack of 1,000 lightning bolts. The robot's head didn't just dent, it imploded. The hybrid energy, both physical and magical, overwhelmed its internal circuitry and tore through its armored chassis like it was wet paper. The entire upper torso of the zero-pointer was vaporized in a blinding flash of emerald and sapphire light. The immense body, now headless and inert, froze for a moment before it began to topple backwards, away from Uraraka. For Izuku, the sensation was one of absolute, transcendent power, followed immediately by unimaginable agony. The force of the punch was too much. He felt the bones in his right arm shatter, turning to powder from his knuckles to his shoulder. The recoil from the jump, a leap that had defied gravity, did the same to both of his legs. A scream of pure pain was ripped from his lungs as he began to fall from a height of over 200 feet, a broken, powerless doll tumbling through the sky. His vision swam. I saved her, was his last coherent thought. But I failed the exam. 0 points. Then, the world went dark. He was vaguely aware of a sharp slap to his cheek, bringing him back from the brink of unconsciousness. He felt a strange weightlessness. He cracked his eyes open to see Uraraka's face, streaked with tears, hovering over his. She had one hand on his back, her quirk active, saving him from becoming a crater on the pavement. She had freed herself, and used the last of her strength to save him. Release! She gasped, and the moment his body was a foot off the ground, he fell with a sickening thud. The pain was blinding, and he blacked out for good. Izuku woke to the smell of antiseptic and the gentle, sweet scent of gummies. He was in a pristine white room, lying on a cot. An four was hooked up to his arm. He tried to sit up and gasped as pain flared through his limbs. Don't push yourself, dearie, a kind, elderly voice said. You gave us all quite a scare. He turned to see a short, elderly woman with her gray hair in a tight bun, holding a syringe shaped like a pair of lips. It was the youthful heroine, Recovery Girl. Your arm and both your legs were completely pulverized, she said, her tone a mixture of professional concern and grandmotherly scolding. Worse than any quirk-related backlash I've seen in years. I've healed the bones, but your stamina is completely depleted. You'll be sore for a few days. She leaned in, her eyes sharp and analytical. You know, it's the strangest thing. What is? Izuku croaked, his throat dry. The energy readings from the site were completely off the charts, she continued, tapping her chin. And not just in terms of output. The type of energy was anomalous. And when they brought you in, there was a distinct smell of ozone around you, like after a major electrical storm. Not the usual scent of bioelectricity from an enhancement quirk. She looked him straight in the eye. That was one heck of a power-up, Sonny. More than just a simple smash. Almost otherworldly. Izuku's heart skipped a beat. She'd noticed. Of course she'd noticed. He had tried to be clever, but the fundamental nature of the magic had bled through. I don't know, he lied, his voice weak. It just happened. I saw her, and I just pushed. Recovery Girl held his gaze for a long moment, then sighed and gave him a gentle pat on the head. Well, whatever it was truly heroic. You saved that young lady's life. Now get some rest. Your journey is just beginning. She handed him a handful of gummy bears and bustled out of the room. Izuku lay back, his body aching, his mind reeling. He had done it. He had saved someone. He had unleashed a power he never knew he had. But in doing so, he had already created a mystery. The two lightnings, one of man, one of magic, had been combined. And now, he had to live with the consequences of wielding a storm no one, least of all himself, could ever hope to understand. 1 week later, a crisp, cream-colored envelope arrived at the Midoriya apartment. It bore no ordinary postage stamp, but the prestigious, stylized red seal of UA High School. Izuku's hands trembled as he held it, the paper feeling as heavy as a slab of marble. This was it. The culmination of 10 months of sweat and agony, 1 moment of impossible power, and a lifetime of yearning. His mother, Inko, hovered behind him, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white, her own anxiety a palpable aura in their small living room. He carefully opened the seal. A small, metallic disc clattered onto the table and projected a holographic image into the air. All Might, in his full hero form, materialized before them, looking as grand and inspiring as he did on television. I am here. As a projection. The hologram boomed, causing Inko to jump. All Might went on to praise Izuku's performance on the written exam, which he had aced, before turning to the practical. The screen shifted to show footage of the exam. There was Izuku, darting through the streets, using debris and clever tactics to disable robots. All Might's voiceover was tinged with pride. Your quick thinking and resourcefulness were impressive. But as you may have guessed, your villain point total was not enough to pass. Izuku's heart sank into his stomach. 0 villain points. Of course. The 13 points he had earned with his wits were erased by the fact that his final, cataclysmic punch had netted him nothing. He had saved the girl, but failed the test. The dream was over before it began. Tears welled in his eyes, a familiar, bitter sting. But that was not the only way to pass the exam. All Might's voice boomed again, pulling him back from the edge of despair. The footage changed, now showing Uraraka approaching the judge's table after the exam. "Excuse me," her projected image said, her voice earnest. "That boy with the green hair, he saved me. Can I give him some of my points? He deserves to be here more than anyone." The footage then showed other students, including the tall, serious boy Ida, also praising the selfless act they had witnessed. "We at UA do not build soldiers. We build heroes," All Might declared, his holographic form puffing out its chest. "And a true hero is one who risks everything to save others. That is why we have another scoring system. Rescue points. Izuku Midoriya, for your selfless, heroic act of saving a fellow examinee at great personal risk, you have been awarded 60 rescue points." The screen flashed with a leaderboard. Izuku's name was at the very top. 73 points total. Not only had he passed, he had come in first place. The dam broke. Izuku buried his face in his hands, sobs of pure, unadulterated joy shaking his entire body. His mother wailed beside him, her tears a waterfall of relief and pride. It was real. He had done it. He was going to UA. He was going to be a hero. "Welcome, young Midoriya," All Might's projection said, his smile seeming to fill the room with light. "This is your hero academia." The first day at UA High felt like walking into a dream. He found his classroom, 1A, the door comically oversized. Taking a deep breath, he slid it open and was immediately greeted by the sight of the serious boy from the exam, Ida Tenya, arguing with a scowling Katsuki Bakugo, who had his feet propped up on his desk. "Take your feet off that desk." Ida chopped the air with his hand. "That is school property, sacred to the upperclassmen who once used it. Like I care what a bunch of extras think," Bakugo sneered, not even bothering to look at him. His crimson eyes, however, flickered towards the door and landed on Izuku. The sneer deepened. "You!" Izuku froze, his newfound confidence evaporating under Bakugo's glare. He knew this was coming. Bakugo was many things, but he wasn't stupid. He had been there for the sludge villain incident, witnessing the sudden appearance of the mysterious champion. And while he hadn't seen the final punch at the exam, the rumors of the kid who obliterated the zero-pointer had undoubtedly reached him. He knew Izuku had been quirkless his entire life. The questions, the suspicion, it was all there, simmering in that fiery gaze. Before Bakugo could say more, the bubbly, brown-haired girl from the exam, Uraraka Ochiko, appeared at Izuku's side. "Hey! It's you! The punchy guy," she said, her smile bright and genuine. "Wow, that smash was incredible. You totally saved me." "Thank you." Izuku's face turned the color of a ripe tomato, and he began stammering uncontrollably, a whirlwind of flustered apologies and denials. His social awkwardness, it seemed, was one thing no amount of divine power could fix. Their chaotic introduction was interrupted by a new voice, a tired, monotone drawl that cut through the classroom chatter like a knife. "If you're here to make friends, you can pack up and leave." Everyone turned to the door. A man who looked like he hadn't slept in a week was lying on the floor in a yellow sleeping bag, peering at them with bloodshot eyes. "It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down. Time is a precious resource. You're not being rational enough." He unzipped the sleeping bag and rose to his feet, revealing a disheveled man in a black jumpsuit with a long, scarf-like weapon wrapped around his neck. "I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa." The collective shock in the room was palpable. This was a pro-hero. Aizawa rummaged in his sleeping bag and pulled out a set of blue UA gym uniforms. "Get changed. Meet me on the field." The quirk apprehension test, as Aizawa called it, was a brutal gauntlet. A 50-meter dash, a grip strength test, a standing long jump, all standard physical evaluations, but with a crucial difference. They were allowed to use their quirks. "Bakugo," Aizawa said, his voice flat. "You got the highest score on the practical exam. What was your farthest softball throw in junior high?" 67 meters, Bakugo grunted. "Try it with your quirk." Bakugo stepped into the circle, a wicked grin spreading across his face. He wound up, and with a thunderous explosion that blasted from his palm, he launched the ball. "Dai-ai!" he screamed. The ball soared, a tiny speck against the blue sky, leaving a trail of smoke. Aizawa held up a small device. 705.2 meters. Know your own maximum. That is the most rational way to form the foundation of a hero. The class erupted in cheers. This looks so fun! Someone shouted. Aizawa's expression soured. Fun? You think this is fun? The air grew cold. You have 3 years here to become heroes. You think it's all going to be games and fun? Fine. New rule. The student who comes in last place in today's test will be judged to have no potential and will be expelled immediately. Panic gripped the class. Izuku felt a cold dread wash over him. Expulsion? On the first day? His quirk, one for all, was a double-edged sword. He couldn't control it. A full power throw would likely earn him an incredible score, but it would also shatter his arm, rendering him useless for the rest of the tests. He would fail everything else and end up in last place. The first test was the 50-meter dash. Izuku was up against Bakugo and Ida. Ida, with the engines in his legs, finished in a blazing 3.04 seconds. Bakugo used small, controlled explosions to propel himself forward, clocking in at 4.13. Izuku just ran 7.02 seconds. It was a pathetic score. He could feel the other students' pitying glances. Grip strength test. He tried to channel a tiny fraction of one for all into his hand, but it was like trying to fill a thimble with a fire hose. The power wouldn't trickle, it would only flood. He managed a score barely above average for a boy his age, while a boy with multiple arms and another who created sticky balls from his head scored exponentially higher. Standing long jump. He cleared the sandbox, but just barely. Bakugo and a graceful girl with a frog-like quirk sailed through the air. He was failing. In every single event, he was placing near the bottom. The fear of expulsion was a physical weight in his gut. The temptation, that seductive whisper, grew louder in his mind. Just say the word, just for one test. The long jump. The speed of Mercury would let you clear the entire field. The grip strength test. The strength of Hercules could crush the device. It would be so easy. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. No. He couldn't. This was his test. Izuku Midoriya's test. He couldn't rely on the champion. If he did it once, he would do it again. It would become a crutch, and he would never learn to stand on his own. He would never master All Might's power. He would be a fraud, a boy hiding behind a god, and he would have learned nothing. The risk of expulsion was terrifying, but the risk of becoming dependent on magic, of losing himself, was worse. Finally, it was his turn for the softball throw. This was his last chance. He had to do something spectacular. He walked to the circle, the ball feeling cool and heavy in his hand. He took a deep breath, focusing on his index finger. He remembered his conversation with All Might. One for all is a full-body power, but maybe, just maybe, you can focus it into a single point to minimize the damage. He wound up, pouring all his will, all his desperation, into that one fingertip. He felt the familiar, agonizing surge of power, the crackle of red energy. He was about to unleash it, to put everything on the line, when a new sensation washed over him. The power in his finger vanished. The red sparks died. He threw the ball with his own strength. It landed with a pathetic thud about 46 meters away. I erased your quirk, Aizawa's voice cut through his confusion. Izuku whirled around. The teacher's eyes were glowing a hellish red, his scarf-like capture weapon floating around him like angry serpents. That ridiculous entrance exam. A person with a quirk that powerful who can't control it is nothing but a liability. You break your bones, someone has to save you. You save one person and then become a useless burden. That's not what it means to be a hero. Aizawa's eyes narrowed. Get your power under control, or your time at Yui will be over. The red glow in Aizawa's eyes faded. You have one more throw. Izuku stood frozen, his teacher's words echoing in his head. He's right. A one-trick pony wasn't a hero. He was a liability. But he couldn't just give up. He had to show him. Show everyone. He had to prove that he wasn't just raw, uncontrolled power. He was a thinker. He was a strategist. He was Izuku Midoriya. He took the ball again. He stepped into the circle. He focused, not on his whole arm, but on the very tip of his index finger. He would concentrate the full, cataclysmic force of One for All into that single, tiny point of contact. The rest of his body would be a shock absorber. It would still break his finger, but a broken finger was 1,000 times better than a broken arm. It was control. It was progress. He drew his arm back and threw. The moment before the ball left his hand, he released the power. Smash! The explosion of force was incredible. A sonic boom cracked the air. The ball became a comet, punching a hole through the sky, propelled by a gale-force wind that kicked up a cloud of dust. But the power wasn't directed at his arm. It was channeled, focused, and released. An agonizing, sharp pain shot up his arm as his index finger bent backwards at an unnatural angle, turning a grotesque purple. But it was only his finger. The rest of his arm was fine. He turned to face Aizawa, a pained but triumphant grin on his face. Mr. Aizawa. I can still move. Aizawa stared at the device in his hand. It read 705.3 meters. A fraction of a meter farther than Bakugo's. He watched Izuku, who was clutching his broken finger, his face a mask of pain but his eyes burning with defiance. A slow, feral grin spread across Aizawa's face. This kid, he muttered. He's interesting. The final results were posted. Izuku Midoriya was in last place. The world seemed to drop out from under him. After all that, after proving he could control it, he had still failed. He had come in 20th out of 20 students. He was going to be expelled. By the way, Aizawa said, his voice dripping with nonchalance as he addressed the stunned class. The whole expulsion thing was a lie. The entire class, save for a knowing girl with a black ponytail, screamed in outrage. It was a rational deception, Aizawa said with a shrug, to make you push yourselves beyond your limits. As the class reeled, Izuku felt a wave of relief so powerful his knees almost buckled. He hadn't been expelled. He had survived his first day, but as he looked at his swollen, purple finger, a new kind of weight settled on him. He had proven he could be a hero on his own terms. But it had nearly cost him everything. The path of One for All was going to be paved with broken bones and agonizing effort. And the other path, the path of Shazam, remained a silent, easy alternative, a constant temptation he would have to fight every single day. That night, sleep offered no respite. His broken finger had been healed by Recovery Girl, but his mind was a battlefield. He sat at his desk, the glow of his monitor illuminating a room plastered with All Might posters. His notebook, a brand new one, number 14, was open. But it wasn't filled with hero analysis. It was filled with frantic, borderline obsessive scribbles about himself. One page was dedicated to One for All. It was covered in complex diagrams of the human body, theories on power distribution, and calculations about bone density and tensile strength. Full cowling seems to be the only way to use OFA without breaking myself. But how to achieve it? Need to spread the power out from a single point to my entire body. Like pouring a jug of water into a cup versus a swimming pool. My body is the cup. I need to make it the pool. How? More training? Mental focus? Is it a switch or a dial? The next page was a stark contrast. It was filled with ancient symbols, names of mythological figures, and questions that had no scientific answers. Shazam. Solomon wisdom. Not just knowledge, but tactical application. Instantaneous. Does it rewrite my neural pathways? Is it a psychic link? Hercules strength. How is it quantified? Is there a limit? Can I lift a continent? A planet? Atlas stamina? Endless. No need for food, water, sleep. How does this affect my human body when I transform back? Cellular energy regeneration? Zeus power. The lightning. Is it generated or summoned? Is it from the rock of eternity? Can I use it for more than just transforming and punching? Achilles' courage / invulnerability. Is it physical or mental? What can hurt me? High-level magic? A weapon forged by a god. Mercury speed / flight. Can I break the light barrier? Can I travel through time? The possibilities are terrifying. He felt like two different people trapped in the same body. There was Deku, the earnest, struggling student of One for All. He was the one who broke his bones, who had to think and strategize and bleed for every tiny scrap of progress. He was the one who felt the pride of overcoming a challenge through sheer force of will. And then there was the champion. The perfect, effortless hero. The being who had all the answers, all the strength, all the power he could ever need. The champion didn't need to struggle. The champion didn't need to learn. He simply was. The conflict was tearing him apart. The wisdom of Solomon felt like cheating. He had spent his whole life honing his analytical skills, and now a magic power did it for him, instantly and perfectly. It made his own greatest talent feel obsolete. The strength of Hercules made his 10 months of brutal training with All Might feel like a child's game. Why spend a year learning to lift a refrigerator when you could lift the entire garbage truck with one hand? He gripped his pen so hard he heard the plastic creak. He had to keep them separate. He had to. For his own sanity. For his own identity. Deku had to be the hero who earned his power. The champion was a weapon, a final defense, a guardian to be unleashed only when humanity itself was at stake. But the line was already blurring. He had used the power of Zeus to supercharge his smash at the entrance exam. Recovery Girl had noticed. Aizawa's skepticism was a constant, probing force. Bakugo's suspicious glares followed him everywhere. How long could he maintain the act? How long until the weight of 2 universes of secrets became too much for one boy to bear? He looked at his reflection in the dark monitor screen. The face staring back was that of a tired 15-year-old boy, dwarfed by the larger-than-life poster of his idol on the wall behind him. But he saw the shadows of 2 other figures in that reflection. One was a towering, smiling giant, a symbol of human potential. The other was a hooded, godlike being of green and gold, a symbol of cosmic power. He was standing between them, a fragile bridge connecting 2 worlds that were never meant to meet, and he was terrified that one day, he would have to choose between them, or be torn apart by the strain. The bus ride to the unforeseen simulation joint, or USJ, was a cacophony of youthful energy. Izuku sat wedged between the window and a surprisingly quiet Ida Tenya, trying to focus on the rhythmic hum of the engine instead of the storm of anxiety and excitement brewing in his own chest. His classmates, now familiar faces after a few weeks of classes, were a vibrant, chaotic mix. Kaminari was trying to flirt with Jiro, who looked utterly unimpressed. Kirishima was loudly proclaiming how manly Bakugo's perpetually aggressive attitude was, much to Bakugo's explosive chagrin. "Your quirk is flashy as hell, man. Perfect for a pro," Kirishima said, his sharp-toothed grin wide. "Unlike my hardening. It's strong, but it doesn't look that cool. A flashy quirk won't mean a thing if you can't control it," Tsuyu Ajiri added from her seat, her voice a placid, blunt croak. She turned her large, expressive eyes towards Izuku. "Speaking of which, Midoriya, your power is a lot like All Might's." Izuku froze, his blood turning to ice. The bus seemed to go silent, though it was only his own perception. He could feel half a dozen pairs of eyes turn to him, including Bakugo's, which were narrowed into slits of pure suspicion. What? And no way," he stammered, waving his hands frantically. "All Might doesn't break his bones every time he uses his power. Mine's just a simple strength enhancement." "Yeah. Nothing special. But it's true that All Might is a master of control," Kirishima mused, unknowingly saving Izuku. "He never causes unnecessary damage. That's true manliness." The conversation shifted, the moment of scrutiny passing, but it left Izuku's heart hammering against his ribs. The comparison was inevitable. One for All was All Might's quirk. The lie was a thin, fragile sheet of glass he had to protect at all costs. And beneath that lie was an even bigger one, a secret of gods and magic that felt like a dormant volcano in his soul. He glanced at his own reflection in the window, a nervous boy with wide green eyes. He wondered what his classmates would think if they knew who, or what, he could become with a single word. Their homeroom teacher, Mr. Aizawa, looking as perpetually exhausted as ever, finally cut through the chatter. "We're here. Look sharp." The USJ was breathtaking. It was a colossal dome, its glass ceilings shimmering in the morning sun. Inside was not a simple gym, but a carefully constructed ecosystem of disaster scenarios. A shipwreck zone with a massive pool, a landslide zone of rocky cliffs, a conflagration zone with perpetually burning buildings, and more. It was a hero's playground and proving ground. They were met at the entrance by another pro-hero, their spacesuit-like costume giving them an ethereal, almost otherworldly appearance. "Hello, everyone. I am the Space Hero 13, they announced, their voice modulated and friendly. I built this facility to train you in a very specific, and very important, aspect of hero work, rescue." 13 went on to explain how many quirks, including their own, could be incredibly dangerous and easily used to kill. Their quirk, Black Hole, could turn anything to dust. It was a power for rescue, for clearing debris and saving lives, but in a fight, it was a lethal weapon. In our superpowered society, 13 concluded, their tone growing serious, the line between heroism and villainy is often just a matter of intent. I hope that here, you will learn how to use your amazing gifts to help people. It was an inspiring speech, a perfect encapsulation of the ideals Izuku had always cherished. He felt a swell of pride and determination. This was where he belonged. This was where he would learn to be a true hero, mastering one for all, step by painful step. He never got the chance. As Aizawa began to outline the day's training exercise, the lights in the massive facility flickered and died. The central water fountain sputtered and went still. A cold, unnatural silence fell over the dome. Then, in the center of the main plaza, the air began to warp. A pinprick of darkness appeared, swirling and expanding into a miasmic, purple-black vortex. It looked like a wound had been torn in the fabric of space itself. 13. Protect the students. Aizawa barked, his usual lethargy gone, replaced by the razor-sharp focus of a veteran pro. He pulled his yellow goggles over his eyes. That's a real warp gate. From the gate, figures began to emerge. Not one or two, but dozens. A motley, terrifying army of thugs and criminals, their faces twisted in malicious grins, and at their lead were three figures who radiated a palpable aura of menace. One was a being made of the same swirling purple mist as the gate, his form vaguely humanoid with two glowing yellow eyes. The second was a hulking, monstrous creature, its dark skin stretched over bulging, unnatural muscles. Its head was bird-like, with a beak and an exposed brain, its eyes vacant and lifeless. But it was the third figure that drew every eye. A slender man with shaggy, pale blue hair, dressed in black. His most disturbing feature was the disembodied hands that were clasped all over his body, on his arms, his shoulders, his neck, and one covering his face like a grotesque mask. The only real heroes I see are Eraserhead and 13, the man with the hands said, his voice a scratchy, petulant drawl. He began to scratch furiously at his neck. According to the schedule we stole, All Might is supposed to be here. I wonder, if we kill a few kids, will he show up? Villains. Real villains. Not robots, not a test. An invasion. Izuku's blood ran cold. This wasn't a simulation. The fear was real, a suffocating blanket that threatened to paralyze him. He could feel Mineta trembling beside him, Kirishima's hands hardening into jagged stone. Kaminari, try the communications. Aizawa ordered as he leaped down the massive staircase, his capture weapon unfurling around him like a living thing. It's no good. They're jamming the signal. Kaminari yelled, pressing a hand to his ear. Aizawa landed in the thick of the villains, a whirlwind of black cloth and precise, brutal movements. He was a master of anti-quirk combat, erasing powers and using his capture weapon to incapacitate villain after villain. He was incredible, but he was one man against 100. We can't just stand here, Kirishima shouted, taking a step forward. Before anyone could move, the swirling mist villain, Kurojiri, appeared before them, his form expanding to block their escape. It is a pleasure to meet you. We are the League of Villains. We have invited ourselves into this bastion of heroes to say hello. And to have All Might, the symbol of peace, draw his last breath. The sheer audacity of the statement was chilling. Kill All Might? The thought was blasphemous, impossible. My role, Kurojiri continued, his yellow eyes glowing, is to scatter you and torture you to death. With that, a dome of purple-black energy erupted outwards, engulfing the students. Izuku felt a terrifying sensation of being pulled apart and reassembled. The world became a nauseating vortex of color and sound. One moment he was on the steps with his classmates. The next, he was falling through the air, the cold, salty spray of water hitting his face. He plunged into the deep water of the shipwreck zone with a jarring shock. For a moment, he flailed, disoriented. The water was surprisingly deep, the massive ship replica looming over him like a steel monster. He broke the surface, gasping for air, and saw two other heads bobbing nearby. Tsuyuazui, her frog-like quirk making her perfectly at home, and a screaming, panicking Mineta Minoru. "We're gonna die!" Mineta shrieked, tears and snot mixing on his face. "Calm down, Mineta," Tsuyu said, her voice steady. "We need to assess the situation." Ribbit. Izuku's own panic was receding, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. As he treaded water, his mind, subtly enhanced by the ever-present wisdom of Solomon, kicked into overdrive. It wasn't just his own frantic analysis anymore. It was clearer, faster. He saw variables, probabilities, and tactical solutions with a startling lucidity. Kurogyri scattered us based on his assumption of our quirks. He assumed we were all combat types. He didn't know Tsuyu is amphibious, or that I have. He stopped himself. He doesn't know anything about me. His thoughts were interrupted as the water around them began to churn. Villains with aquatic and mutant quirks. A man with a shark's head, another with tentacles, several with green, scaly skin, were surrounding them, circling like predators. "Look at that! A bunch of little tadpoles." The shark villain sneered, showing off rows of needle-sharp teeth. "The boss said to kill you, but we can have a little fun first." Mineta screamed again, pulling the purple, sticky balls from his head and throwing them wildly. They bobbed uselessly on the surface of the water. "My quirk is useless against these guys. This is bad," Tsuyu said, her calm finally wavering. "They have the advantage in this environment." Izuku looked at the massive ship in the center of the lake. It was their only hope of getting to solid ground. But the villains were between them and it. He needed a plan. He needed to think. "Okay. What do we have?" "Tsuyu is strong in the water, a great swimmer, and has her tongue. Mineta's quirk produces spheres with incredible adhesive properties. My quirk. One for all. He couldn't use a full smash. A 100% punch underwater would be devastating, but the recoil would shatter his arm, leaving him to drown. He needed something controlled. Something precise. He remembered the softball throw. His finger. Delaware smash. A flick. An air bullet. But underwater, it would be a water bullet. A concussive force. It could work, but one flick wouldn't be enough to take them all out. He needed something bigger. Something that could neutralize all of them at once. The villains were circling, tightening their net. The wisdom of Solomon wasn't giving him a divine answer. It was simply enhancing his own thought processes, allowing him to connect dots at lightning speed. Water force. Mineta's balls. The idea hit him like a lightning strike. It was insane. It was reckless. It was their only shot. "Tsuyu! Mineta! I have a plan!" Izuku shouted, his voice ringing with a newfound authority that surprised even himself. "Listen carefully." He explained it in a torrent of words, his tactical mind working faster than his mouth. Tsuyu's eyes widened slightly, a sign of her surprise and approval. Mineta just sobbed, but nodded along. "Okay," Izuku said, taking a deep breath. "Tsuyu, I need you to get Mineta on your back and swim down, right to the center of them. Mineta, when I give the signal, you need to throw as many of your balls as you can, straight down. But they'll just float." Mineta wailed. "Exactly," Izuku confirmed. "Now go!" Tsuyu wrapped her long tongue around Mineta's waist and dove, a green blur beneath the surface. The villains, confused by this strange tactic, began to converge on their position. "What are they doing?" The shark villain grunted. That was his cue. Izuku took a deep breath, filling his lungs until they burned, and plunged underwater. He swam down a few feet, the pressure mounting. He could see the dark shapes of the villains closing in on Tsuyu and Mineta below. He aimed his hand not at any single villain, but at the water directly beneath the center of their circle. He focused one for all, the crackling green energy surprisingly visible in the murky water, into the tip of his middle finger. He remembered the pain, the feeling of his bones snapping, and braced for it. Now! He screamed in his mind. He saw Mineta, from his perch on Tsuyu's back, begin to pull the spheres from his head in a panic, releasing them into the water. As the purple balls began their slow, buoyant ascent, Izuku flicked his finger. Delaware smash! The result was beyond anything he could have predicted. It wasn't a bullet of water, it was a detonation. A sphere of pure, concussive force erupted from his fingertip, displacing a massive volume of water in an instant. The entire lake seemed to convulse. An underwater shockwave blasted outwards and downwards. The villains were thrown into chaos. But the true genius of the plan was the second stage. The displaced water rushed back in to fill the vacuum his smash had created, forming a powerful, inescapable undertow. It became a whirlpool, a swirling vortex of water right in the middle of the shipwreck zone. The villains were sucked into the vortex, their quirks useless against the sheer force of the water. And as they were pulled together, screaming and flailing, they slammed into the cloud of Mineta's rising spheres. One by one, they were stuck fast, to each other, to their own bodies, to their thrashing limbs. The end result was a single, massive, grotesque ball of flailing villains, stuck together by Mineta's super-adhesive quirk, trapped helplessly in the center of the whirlpool. Izuku surfaced, his fingers screaming in agony, but his heart pounding with triumph. He looked over to see Tsuyu and Mineta surface nearby. It worked! Mineta cried, this time with tears of joy. I'm useful! That was amazing, Midoriya, Tsuyu said, giving a slow, thoughtful blink. Your plan was brilliant. And scary. Ribbit. They swam to the ship, the immediate danger neutralized. From their vantage point, they could now see the chaos unfolding in the rest of the USJ. And what they saw made Izuku's victory feel small and insignificant. In the central plaza, All Might had arrived. His appearance had been a tidal wave of hope. He had taken out dozens of the low-tier villains in the blink of an eye. But now, he was locked in a brutal, horrifying stalemate with the bird-like creature, the Noma. Every punch All Might threw, punches that could alter the weather, were absorbed by the creature's dark, rubbery flesh with a sickening squelch. There was no impact, no recoil. It was like punching a mountain of solidified tar. And in return, the Noma's own attacks were brutally effective, its fists slamming into the symbol of peace with enough force to crack the very ground beneath them. Izuku, Tsuyu, and Mineta watched from the edge of the water, having made their way back to the plaza. Other students were there too, regrouping near the entrance where 13 lay injured. Everyone was watching the titanic struggle, their faces pale with a dawning horror. This wasn't a fight. It was a deconstruction. The villains had brought a monster specifically designed to kill All Might. Its quirk, it must be shock absorption, Izuku muttered, his analytical mind kicking in despite his fear. He clutched his broken finger, the pain a dull throb compared to the terror he felt for his mentor. But All Might is hitting it with more than it should be able to handle. Why isn't it working? Perhaps you should be paying closer attention, the man with the hands, Shigaraki, rasped. He was standing a short distance away, watching the fight with a gleeful, unhinged intensity. Noma doesn't just have shock absorption. He also has super regeneration. No matter how hard you hit him, he just heals. I had him custom-made to kill you, All Might. He is your perfect counter. The fight grew more desperate. All Might was slowing down. He was still smiling, but it was a pained, strained thing. He was fighting with a ferocity Izuku had never seen, moving faster than the eye could follow, but the Noma was a wall. It matched him blow for blow. The creature finally found an opening. It grabbed All Might from behind, its massive fingers digging into his sides like railroad spikes. Another of its arms snaked around, its hand gripping All Might's head. Then, the warped villain, Kurogiri, materialized a gate directly under the Noma's hand and another behind its back. The Noma plunged its hand into the first gate. The hand emerged from the second gate and clawed into All Might's side, his weak spot. The old wound. All Might roared in agony, a sound so full of pain it seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Blood, dark and copious, began to pour from his side, steaming as it hit the ground. You see, heroes, Shigaraki cackled, even the symbol of peace has a weak spot. A timer. And I think his has just about run out. The sight of All Might, bleeding, trapped, and being slowly crushed, was a breaking point for everyone. Izuku felt something snap inside him. This couldn't be happening. All Might couldn't lose. He just couldn't. He took a step forward, his legs trembling. One for all crackled around him, a storm of green lightning. He had to do something. He had to. He was too slow. In a literal explosion, Bakugo launched himself across the plaza, slamming into the misty form of Kurogiri and pinning him to the ground. Simultaneously, Kirishima charged at Shigaraki, his hardened fist aimed for the villain's head, and Todoroki unleashed a massive wave of ice that swept across the ground, encasing the Noma's right side and leg, freezing it in place. "Get your filthy hands off All Might!" Bakugo screamed, his hands sparking menacingly over Kurogiri's solid neckpiece. The sudden, coordinated attack from UA's strongest students was a brilliant, heroic gambit. For a moment, it seemed to turn the tide. All Might used the opening, the Noma's momentary imbalance, to tear himself free from its grip. But the hope was short-lived. "Nomu," Shigaraki ordered, his voice dangerously calm as he easily dodged Kirishima's attack. The Nomu, with a horrifying crunch of shattering bone and muscle, simply tore its frozen limbs from the rest of its body. It moved impossibly fast, its mangled stumps already beginning to bubble and reform. Before Todoroki or Kirishima could react, it was on Bakugo. It was a blur of motion. One moment Bakugo was pinning Kurogiri, the next he was sent flying by a backhand from the Nomu, slamming into a wall dozens of feet away. The creature then turned its vacant eyes towards the now freed All Might, who was clutching his bleeding side, his smile completely gone. "This is the end, All Might," Shigaraki said, scratching his neck with a feverish glee. "Noma. Finish him. Make it painful," the Noma charged. It was a death sentence. All Might was too injured, too weakened. Bakugo was down. Todoroki and Kirishima were too far away. There was no one left, no one but Izuku. He stood frozen, his mind a screaming vortex of absolute terror and ice-cold calculation. The options laid themselves bare before him, each one more terrible than the last. Option 1, use a 5% Delaware smash. Useless. A pinprick against the mountain. It wouldn't even make the Noma flinch. Option 2, use a 100% smash. He would have to charge the beast head-on. The recoil would not just break his arm, it would turn every bone in his body to dust. He would die, and even then, it might not be enough. The Noma's shock absorption had tanked hundreds of All Might's full-power punches. There was a very real possibility he would sacrifice his life for absolutely nothing. All Might would still die. Option 3, say the word. He could feel the power thrumming beneath his skin, a deep, resonant hum of cosmic potential. One word, and a god would stand in his place. The champion would have the strength to tear the Noma apart. The speed to intercept it in a nanosecond. The power to end this entire invasion in a heartbeat. It was the only option with a guaranteed chance of success. But the cost. The secret. His life at UA would be over. The questions from Aizawa, Nizu, the government, they would never end. He would become a specimen, a mystery to be solved. His dream of following in All Might's footsteps, of earning his place through his own hard work with One for All, would be forfeit. He would no longer be Izuku Midoriya, the hero in training. He would be something else. Something other. He saw the Noma closing the distance. He saw the life draining from All Might's eyes, the symbol of peace finally, truly, facing his own mortality. He saw his mentor, his hero, the man who had looked at a quirkless, worthless boy and told him, "You can become a hero." All Might had given him a future. What good was that future if it was built on the grave of the man who had made it possible? The wisdom of Solomon didn't offer a gentle suggestion. It presented the truth with cold, unyielding clarity. All other options lead to failure and death. The asset, All Might, will be terminated. Probability of success for conventional methods, 0.01%. Probability of success for unconventional methods, 98.7%. The choice is strategically obvious, and beneath the cold logic, the courage of Achilles burned away his fear. It wasn't a roar, it was a quiet, unshakable certainty. A hero does not let others die. A hero pays the price. Tears streamed down Izuku's face, hot and silent. They were not tears of fear, but of mourning. He was mourning the simple life he could no longer have, the simple dream he was about to sacrifice. He was saying goodbye to Izuku Midoriya, the boy who just wanted to be like All Might. He looked at his mentor, his idol, his friend, and made the only choice a hero could. His legs, powered by a desperate, final surge of one for all, propelled him forward. He shot past Kirishima and Todoroki, a green blur of pure resolve. He didn't run towards Inoma to punch it. He ran to stand between it and its target. He skidded to a halt directly in front of the weakened All Might, his small frame a ridiculously inadequate shield. He faced the charging behemoth, a creature of pure, unthinking destruction, and spread his arms wide. The Noma was feet away, its massive, clawed hand raised to tear him to pieces. Shigaraki cackled. All Might's eyes widened in horror. No! Young Midoriya, get away! Izuku closed his eyes, the tears still flowing. He took one last, shuddering breath, and with all the power in his soul, with the full weight of the sacrifice he was making, he screamed the word that would shatter his world forever. Shazam!